Thank you so much for streaming our latest message from First Baptist Church. Here at FBC, our mission is to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. We do that by thinking big, thinking small, thinking in, and thinking out. We hope that this message helps you as you continue to grow in your faith. If you would like to stay connected to FBC, you can visit our website at fbcloyd.ca, look us up on Facebook and Instagram, or download our free mobile app. Now here's the latest from FBC. Enjoy.
Hey, good morning, everyone. I hope you're having an awesome morning so far. I'm glad that we're Canadians and we're strong and we're not babies and we can drive on some icy roads here and there. Years ago, I was on tour with Kairos and we were doing a tour in the southern states, and it was kind of like getting to be winter down there, which is a lot nicer than here. And I remember we had this show booked in some town in Georgia, like 2 weeks out, and the promoter called us and said, you know, I looked at the forecast, and 2 weeks from today, on the day of the show, there is a chance, a slight possibility, that it might snow about an inch. So we have to cancel the show. And I was like, are you kidding? And they're like, no, absolutely not. Like, we're not going to put it on an event with an inch of snow out there. And so, anyways, I'm glad that we are not like Georgians, and we can man up and own an inch of snow, a little bit of ice. It's pretty sweet. Just attach your kids to the back of the car with some ice skates on and drag them here. Because I'm glad you guys are here. I hope you guys had an awesome Thanksgiving. I did. I was with my family in Calgary, and I got to go visit my cousin's church, which I love working at a church, but one thing I'll say is when you work at a church, it is really nice when you're on holidays to go to another church, because what you get to do is you sleep in, and you just go to second service. You don't have to go to the first, and you can show up on time. You can be a few minutes late if you want. And while the service is going on, things can be going wrong around you, and you can just be like, I don't care. Like, the whole building could be burning down. You're just like, it's not my problem. I'm not at FBC, so whatever. And so it is awesome to get to do that. I am sad I missed last week, though, but I caught it on our YouTube channel, which if you ever miss a Sunday, you can catch it on YouTube or on our app. You know, I'm kind of sad I missed last week, but I'm kind of glad I did, because after watching the video of Jay Calder playing, I'll tell you one thing that's for sure, I will never, ever play guitar at FBC again. That is, like, too embarrassing. We need to not bring in people like that make us look stupid. That's crazy. The coolest thing, I think, though, is hearing that, so Thanksgiving this isn't the coolest thing, but Thanksgiving weekend is like one of our lowest attendance services of the fall every year, just with the long weekend and everything, and I know there was snow. And so it's been by far our smallest weekend this fall so far. But what's cool is even with like a smaller weekend, our church sponsored 69 kids through Compassion last Sunday. Yeah, let's make some noise for that. That's awesome. I don't even feel awkward about you clapping about that, because you're not clapping for me, because I wasn't here, so you know I didn't sponsor one of those kids. But I think that's amazing, especially as the week before we're talking about thinking out, that our church would say, yeah, we care about thinking out. We will take care of that many kids around the world who are in need. When I was in Kairos, we did this exact same thing, just with World Vision, where it shows we try to get people to sponsor kids. And I will tell you that 69 kids in one show is like, we never even came close to that. That is actually like outrageous. So all that to say, that sounds like an awesome number, but from someone who used to do that and be a part of an organization like that, let me just tell you, that is crazy. And I'm stoked to be a part of a church that would think out like that and cares enough about the needs of people around the world. I'm also really pumped that this week it's not like you guys sponsored 0 kids and I have to get up and scold you guys or anything like that. So anyways, thank you for being such an awesome church. I am proud to call FBC home. I love being part of this church family. So this week we're starting this new series called Ask It. The subtext is the question that will revolutionize how you make decisions. So this is a 6-week series we're doing, and it's what we call a church-wide series. So if you're new here at FBC, when we talk about doing a church-wide series, what that means is that on Sunday mornings and at your small groups during the week, we're like doing the same series. And this time it's a video series by Andy Stanley. And it's kind of interesting for me when, sometimes I sit in my office and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about on Sunday. With this, I watch a sermon by some other preacher, and then I have to be like, It's really, I find it really challenging because I'm like, I kind of got to say the same thing, but I got to say a different thing, so that on Wednesday night, people aren't like, oh, Ryan isn't actually funny. He just ripped off Andy Stanley's jokes or something like that. And so the last 2 years, we've been doing some of these. And so some weeks you might be like, oh yeah, they're kind of talking about some of the same things. Some weeks it might sound really similar. I remember last year during Explicit Gospel, though, I had 1 week where I preached, and then there were small groups that week, and one of the people from one of the small groups came up to me and they're like, I was waiting for him to talk about some of the stuff you were talking about. And so I don't know if I watched the wrong video or what happened, but you'll find that some weeks it'll be really similar, and some weeks it might just be kind of the same topic, but from a way different angle. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're not in a small group, join one. You might miss the first week or two of this, but join a small group. It's so good. And if you're in a small group, invite other people to join your small group. Just look around, find people that look kind of like you and say, hey, you should come to my small group. We're going to be doing this. I love doing these church-wide series for 2 reasons. One, it gives us a chance to just dive deeper into what we're talking about rather than, just coming on Sunday mornings and doing that, or just doing your own thing in your small group. But I also just love knowing that we're kind of all going through the same thing. So when I'm kind of like feeling like guilty and ashamed and convicted about the things I need to deal with in my life, I can look out and be like, oh, at least they all feel like garbage about the same things too, And so I love doing that, and I love knowing that we're kind of all on the same journey in that regard as well. Anyways, let's pray and we'll dive into this series. God, thank you so much that we, despite the weather and despite anything else in the world, we can come together and hang out and reflect on how awesome and amazing your love is, God. You are so good to us. Thank you for this morning. I pray that through this series we will grow closer to you, and that our mission of leading people and ourselves into a growing relationship with you would be accomplished, God. We love you so much. Amen. Awesome. So in this 6-week series, it all centers around this one question, and that's why this morning is called The Question. This one question that Andy Stanley submits, and I would agree, is a question that will revolutionize how you make decisions, and is also a question that will be able to save you from all kinds of heartbreak and regret and guilt and bad feelings, and if you had been asking the question in the past, would have saved you from a lot of that. And so we're going to be talking about that question for the next 6 weeks. And the question is something that I'm going to tell you a little bit later on in the sermon, okay? So hopefully that curiosity got you a little bit there. Andy Stanley, in this first week, he dives into this passage in Ephesians 5, verses 15 to 17, and we'll throw that up on the screen in a second. You can feel free to follow along in your Bibles if you'd like. And we're going to look at that passage as well. It's kind of cool as I was watching the message by Andy Stanley, because he's kind of reflecting on the transformation that this guy Paul has. So Paul's the guy who wrote the book of Ephesians. So what it is just a letter to these people in this place called Ephesus who are following Jesus to kind of like give them some instructions on how to live. And he was kind of reflecting on what happened in Paul's life. Because if you don't know Paul, what he was is he was like one of the greatest enemies of the Christian faith that ever lived. He's a guy his whole life, his whole identity, his whole purpose was wrapped up in finding Christians and going out and arresting them and beating them and persecuting them. And we don't know for sure, but a lot of people would think him and his crew probably responsible for killing Christians because of their faith, trying to tear down this religion called Christianity. But then one day he turns to Jesus. He becomes a Christian, he becomes a follower of Jesus, and becomes one of the most influential, by far one of the most influential voices in all of Christian history. One of the most impacting people. He has challenged and shaped the faith of people for thousands of years. What a crazy transformation. The analogy Andy Stanley uses in this series he did like a year or two ago. So the analogy he uses might be a little different now, but he talked about how it would be kind of like if, there was someone who was a Democrat. Say you were a hardcore Democrat, and you're driving to work, and on the way to work, you convert in your car to becoming a hardcore Republican, and so hardcore that by the time you get to work, you're trying to like convert everyone else to be a Republican. Now that analogy might not be that like pointed right now, because probably a lot of people in the States like, I have no idea what I should be. And, it's like, it just takes that next Facebook video to be like, all right, Hillary, no, okay, Trump, it's like, I don't know. But, typically, that's a big transition. And that is like big for someone to not only change, but to want to like bring other people to that change. So for us, for me, I was born in Red Deer, Alberta. I lived most of my life in Calgary, Alberta. I'm an Alberta boy, born and raised. And so then years ago, I moved to this magical town called Lloydminster, and it's in 2 different provinces, Alberta and Saskatchewan. And, a lot of people around here, they argue about which province is better. Something like Alberta's better, and they have all these different arguments and stuff. And I just want you to know, I don't engage in those petty arguments. I think that's immature because like I don't need to. I know that Alberta is way better than Saskatchewan, and that will never change. So no need to argue. You Saskatchewaners, you can argue all you want, but I don't need to. I remember when I first moved here, a little while later, Talcy and I, we bought a house, and we found like the right house, but there's one problem. It was a little further east than we thought it should be. And so I remember I had to get my driver's license changed, the license plate I put on my car. I sent a picture to Barry of my driver's license. I was like, dude, I got a Saskatchewan driver's license. And he's making fun of me. But the awesome thing is, like a year later, he moves to the Saskatchewan side. And he's like, oh, yeah, me too. And so, but, it was like, man, like, what have we done with our lives? But, on the flip side, for you guys who are from Saskatchewan, you've lived in Saskatchewan your whole life, there is nothing I could ever do to convince you to cheer for the Stampeders, right? The Stampeders could win the next 50 Grey Cups, which won't happen, but they could do that, and you would still wear those stupid watermelons on your head like day in and day out. Nothing would change that, right? And for sure, even if I was like, hey, you know what, the Stamps are pretty cool, and you're like, all right, I can kind of cheer for them inside of it. You're not going to like go to your family that's like Saskatchewan and born and raised and be like, guys, I got you all Stampeders jerseys for Christmas, right? Like that's never going to happen. And Paul, he went through this crazy transformation where he was just like, his whole life, his whole identity is this one thing. And then the complete opposite, he gets completely transformed into this entirely different thing. And he becomes one of the most influential voices in the Christian faith that's ever existed. And one thing that's cool for me, reflecting on that, is that I know that if Paul can go through that crazy of a transformation and be used in that powerful of ways, if Jesus can take one of his biggest enemies and use him in such powerful ways, for sure, he can use any of us here at FBC, even if you're from Saskatchewan, in incredibly powerful ways. And he has great things in store for us, and he can use us for great things. And that's amazing. All right, so we're going to dive into this passage in Ephesians 5:15-17. But first, I just want to lay a little bit of context here. So in the first 14 verses of this chapter, what's going on is Paul is telling Christians, followers of Jesus, how they should live their lives. And, if you're like me, you're like, whoa, I don't want you to tell me how to live my life. Like, you can tell me, I'll be defensive about it, but then later I'll make that exact same change, pretend I thought of it, even though you were the one that told me about it weeks ago. We don't like being told how to live our lives. So what's going on is he's telling people, it's like, here's how you need to live your lives. He's warning them about like immoral things they should stay away from. And he's telling them to live moral and pure and what the Bible calls holy lives. And in the context here is that he's talking about some different specific sins and things that they struggle with, but he's talking to people, he describes them as once having been in darkness. He says, but now you're children of light. He says, as I've been transformed by Jesus, as Jesus has changed my life, you guys were once in darkness, now you're in light. So this is how you should live. And so that brings us up to verse 15, and there's some fill in the blanks in your bulletin. You can feel free to throw this on the first blank. That's the first one, Ephesians 5:15-17. And this is what he starts out by saying. He says, be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise. So be very careful how you live. And he ties us to being wise rather than being unwise. So if you want to be careful, you need to be wise, not as unwise. And he goes on to say, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. So Paul says you need to be careful. And in doing that, you need to be wise, which is being not unwise, and you need to make the most of every opportunity. And why? Because the days are evil. See, this days are evil thing and the context of where people came from is kind of why Paul is saying, you guys need to be careful. Because you're only careful when there's a risk at hand, right? So like if you go to your mom and you're like, Mom, I'm going to go grab a cup and fill it with water, and I'm going to slowly and safely drink that at the kitchen table. Your mom's not gonna be like, okay, you need to be careful, put on some knee pads, and but if you're like, hey mom, I'm gonna go get a cup, I'm gonna fill it with kerosene, I'm gonna learn how to breathe fire. I saw a video on YouTube. She's like, you need to be careful, like make sure you've watched enough YouTube videos to know how to actually do that, right? Or if you're like, hey mom, I'm gonna go lay down and eat a snack and watch the Jays game. Your mom's not freaking out about that. She's not telling you to be careful. She's not like saying you need to ask your dad if that's safe, if that's okay. But if you go and you say, hey mom, some of my friends and I, we got our mountain bikes, right? And we built this huge ramp, and we got some parachutes, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna set up at the Grand Canyon, we're gonna hit as hard as we can, do as many backflips as we can, and just parachute to safety in the Grand Canyon. And your mom's gonna be like, you need to be careful. Because she knows the risk associated with that. She knows how much that mountain bike cost. And she knows that it is gonna be destroyed You're laughing, but that's exactly the first thing my mom would be thinking about. The thing is your mom knows that there's a risk. And I mean, in that case, she would probably, if she was a good mom, either tell you not to do that or else grab a parachute herself and come do it with you. But she knows that there's a risk, so she tells you to be careful. You're not saying be careful when there isn't a huge risk. And in this context, Paul is saying, you guys used to be in darkness. You used to struggle with sin. You were lost, and you've been saved, and that's awesome, but you need to be careful. The days are evil, and we know that that is true nowadays as it was back then, that the days are evil. There is so much around you that would want to drag you away from making the most of every opportunity, drag you away from being wise, would encourage you to be unwise, would encourage you to fall back into the patterns of how you lived before your life was transformed by Jesus. So Paul is saying you need to be careful. And when people tell you to be careful, when people are concerned about your well-being, that's because they care about you. They care about you, so they tell you to be careful. For me, when I was young, my mom would say, don't do something, or, you gotta be careful. I just thought she was trying to, kill my fun, just try to be a killjoy. I go to my friends, and I'm like, my mom is so lame, she won't even let me bike into the Grand Canyon. My friend's like, oh, that's crazy, man. So I go to my mom, it's like, Mom, all the other kids' parents are letting them do that. I'm thinking, she's like, really? Can I get the list of their parents' names? I'm gonna call social services. That's crazy. But she cared about me, so she would say, no, you can't do that, or you need to be careful. Or when I was doing things I could, she's like, be careful, take care of yourself. She cared about my well-being and wanted me to take care of myself. And I think it's really cool. As I read this, I think about this guy named Paul who cares and is concerned about the most important part of our well-being, and that's our spiritual well-being. As much as, we care about people's physical and mental and emotional health and well-being, Paul starts pointing at the most important part of our well-being, and that's the spiritual aspect, and says, you need to be careful. And I care about that. He's kind of like this spiritual parent who says, I care about you and I want you to take care of yourself. Now, for us to read that from Paul is interesting because he's been dead for a long time. But it's cool that someone who wrote something and it's still so relevant to our lives. But one thing I was thinking about, this is kind of just an aside, but one thing that would be really interesting is I kind of picture myself sitting in this church in Ephesus back in the day. And they pull out this letter and they're like, we're going to read this letter, it's from Paul. And everyone there knows who Paul is, whether it's because he's this great guy who's been planting churches and writing letters and he's famous for that, or probably more so because he was the guy that was persecuting and arresting everyone. Imagine this, you're sitting in church this morning and I come out and preach and I'm the guy that's arrested your parents or persecuted your family or your people close around you, people who you know have been arrested or beaten or persecuted by me and my friends or people like me. Yet God still uses people like that. God uses situations around you to speak into your life and teach you some amazing things about knowing Him. That really has nothing to do with the series, but just kind of reflecting on that, just thinking imagine you're sitting in Ephesus, and it's we have a letter by a guy who threw your parents in jail, and they're still there because of him, but now he wants to tell you how to live your life. How defensive we could be. And in a few weeks, we're actually going to be talking in this series about how important it is to be open to the voices around us and how important it is to let people speak into our lives, sometimes regardless of who they are. So Paul says, be careful, make the most of every opportunity. And he says, this is only possible if you're wise and not if you're unwise. And he finishes off in verse 17. He says, therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is. You read the Bible and you get this overwhelming sense that God has a will for mankind. God has a will for the whole of mankind that He created, and He has a will and a purpose for every single person that He's created. I don't know how specific that is, but He created you, He put you on this planet to be a part of this amazing will and purpose that He has. But in this passage, it shows us that foolishness and practicing foolishness, forgetting to be wise, actually puts us in complete opposition. It's antithetical to God's will. And beyond that, not only does foolishness prevent us from understanding God's will, and not only is it opposite to it, but in 1 Peter 2:15, we read that it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Not only can foolishness prevent us from that, but when we start to understand and live out God's will, He sends us on the offensive against foolishness. This balance, this difference between wisdom and foolishness is actually a really stark oppositional contrast. It isn't this really close, small difference type thing. This is the difference between being in God's will and participating in His will and understanding His will, or else failing to do that and failing to make the most of every opportunity and failing to be careful in days that are evil. So Paul says, to wrap it up, be careful, make the most of every opportunity, don't be foolish, understand what God's will is, and you do this by being wise rather than being unwise. One thing we've been doing this year, and it's been awesome, is the Get a Grip on the Bible reading plan. And I like it because people are reading the Bible, but I also really like it because, again, it's kind of one of those things that brings a lot of kind of community to what we're doing here. When I'm reading a story in the Bible, someone else is reading it. And I love it because people come and talk to me sometimes like, what's up with this story? And I don't have to go read it because I just read it. And so we're kind of on the same page, literally. And so it's been really cool. And one thing I've really enjoyed is, and before I say that, next year, I want to say quickly too, slight preview, we're going to be doing a kind of a follow-up plan. It's not going to be the whole Bible in here. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I hope you struggle with curiosity like me so that you'll be like, oh, what is it? But we're going to be doing something really cool next year, so be looking for that and get ready for that and get ready to commit to that. I know a lot of people, they've been talking to me, they're like, Ryan, I'm like 2 months behind, 3 months behind, 5 years behind. I'm like, how's that possible? We started in January, but they're like, I'm so far behind. And if you're behind, I just want to encourage you. You're reading the Bible, and that's awesome. God, there's no verse in the Bible that says, thou hast 365 days to ingest the Word of God in its entirety. Read the Bible. That's awesome. Keep up with it. Keep going. If it's the Bible in 14 months, 16 months, 20 years, whatever it is, keep on going. Don't give up. But get ready because next year we're going to do some pretty cool stuff that's going to be awesome. Anyways, I'm like rabbit trail. So I'm back. Okay. So recently, one of my friends in the church here, she came up to me and she said, Ryan, I have a question. And I just want to say, I love it when people come and ask me questions about the Bible because it's a cool opportunity for me to learn. So I know some people feel bad when they come and ask me stuff or ask us stuff. Send questions in through the app, email us, Facebook us, come talk to us, whatever. We love talking about the Bible. It's kind of like our job. So anyways, she came and talked to me and she's like, I've been reading these books of the Old Testament, these poetic books, what we call these wisdom literature. And she's like, it talks a lot about the folly and wisdom and kind of the difference between folly and wisdom. And another word for folly is foolishness. And so we were kind of talking about that, and it was really cool because that was a few weeks ago, and then leading into the series, it kind of got me thinking about this a lot. Throughout the Old Testament, the next blank we have is it contrasts a lot these ideas of foolishness and wisdom. It puts them in complete opposition to each other. And sometimes it talks about them in isolation, but there are quite a few passages where it actually talks about them right beside each other, usually in what Old Testament scholars call antithetical parallelism, but basically it's a sentence where they use these two words and they express how opposite they are. So I've got a few passages here that I want to show you an example of that. So first of all, in Proverbs 3:35, it says, the wise inherit honor, but fools get only shame. So pretty straightforward. Wisdom, honor. Foolishness, shame. Pretty good thing to get the honor rather than the shame. Proverbs 10:1, it says, a wise son brings joy to his father. And this next part I can attest to, looking back at my teenage years, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. So I was going to say, sorry, Mom, because they watch this through the app. So, but it's huge. I mean, the way you practice wisdom and foolishness impacts not only you, but it impacts those around you, and for sure your parents. I mean, if we were the type of church that amens a lot, all the parents with teenage kids in here would be like, amen. They know. Proverbs 14:1, this is my favorite one. The language in this is so intense. So Proverbs 14:1, the wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down. So the language in this is just hilarious and awesome to me. Because I'm thinking, I'm a single guy out there, I read this passage, I'm like, oh, I don't have a house. I'm going to go marry a wise woman. Because then it's I do. It's all right, get building, But the other end of this is so crazy. Imagine guys, married guys, you come home from a long day of work one day, you walk up to your house, and what you see your wife is ripping the siding off of your house, punching windows out, and you're like, what? What are you doing? You look to Proverbs 14:1, you want to read it to her, but you're like, if I call her a fool right now, this probably won't end with just the house. So if you feel like your wife is becoming foolish, you should sell now. But the language here is intense. How completely opposite these things are is so crazy. One of my favorite books of the Bible is Ecclesiastes, and recently I got to, we do these blogs through the Grip Reading Plan called Grip Thoughts. Maybe you read them, maybe you don't, it's okay. But I just got to write one on Ecclesiastes, and really cool for me. And Ecclesiastes is this really cool book written by one of the wisest men that's ever lived, but it's kind of it's kind of a crazy book because at times he says things that are so pointed and so wise and so deep and profound. But then at times I'm like, am I reading like the memoirs of like a junior high girl who just got dumped 3 times in the last year, because it's like so kind of like melodramatic and all over. And anyways, it's a really cool book. But at one point, Solomon is talking about the difference between wisdom and foolishness. And this is what he concludes. He says, I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. So he's not saying, hey, you know what, it's kind of a little bit of a better option, kind of in the same vein, in the ways that you think. What he's saying is these are completely opposite things. If you want to practice wisdom, that's awesome. If you want to practice foolishness, you're doing the exact opposite of what the good thing is. Rather than choosing honor, you're choosing shame. Rather than bringing joy to those around you, your parents, you're bringing grief to them. You're making it rough for them. Rather than, I don't even know what to say about this house thing, but rather than building things up and creating a benefit in your life, you're bringing destruction by practicing foolishness rather than wisdom. I want to create a little bit of a really palatable definition. For me, I like it when we're talking about concepts, rather than to just throw out kind of churchy words or even just words in general, to have like a bit of a way that we can express them that makes a lot of sense. And the way it makes a lot of sense to me is this, and I'd encourage you guys to write this down, because I think this makes it really easy to start to understand the concept of wisdom and foolishness. First of all, wisdom, I would say, is the proper application of knowledge. This one's going to blow you away, but foolishness is the improper application of knowledge. This is the way I think we could best define these words as Christians. So what that looks like is this. I hope that when you guys come to FBC, that sometimes you learn something. Sometimes. That would be awesome. I hope that in life, when you're reading or watching things, or you're on the internet, you're talking to people, you're at work, school, whatever, that sometimes you're learning things. And a lot of times, I think what we do in life is we meet someone who knows a lot of things, they've got all these facts, and we're like, that is such a wise person. But I think that that's actually a completely false understanding of what wisdom is. You could be the most knowledgeable person in the world, and if you don't properly apply that knowledge to your life, then I think that all your knowledge has done is proved you to be a fool. I think that with more knowledge, you just only have more proof of whether you're actually a fool or whether you're wise. So it's like this. Last week, Jay Calder comes. If you weren't here, you can catch it on YouTube or on the FBC app. But Jay Calder comes, and he talks about how there are people in need all around the world, people who desperately need our help. And the statistics are like astounding. And he says, the idea is, he says, God's compassionate and loving, so we should give, we should be generous, right? So maybe you've never heard that before. Maybe you have. But anyways, you ingest that, and that's knowledge. You know that. That's in your brain. You understand that concept. If from there, you do nothing about that, then you haven't even applied the knowledge. The knowledge to you is useless. And let me be clear on that. If you didn't sponsor a kid last week, I'm not talking about you. But what I'm saying is that if you at no point in your life decide, I'm going to be generous and I'm going to give and respond to how God's loved me and respond to the needs in the world and do something about that, then the knowledge that there's need and that God calls us to be loving and compassionate and giving, that knowledge actually proves you to be foolish rather than proving you to be wise. Being wise or foolish, it really is not about how much you know. It's about what you do with what you know. Here at FBC, one of the biggest things we desire is to see life change, because we know that that means that knowledge has entered your mind and has taken root and changed you. We would rather have a room full of people whose lives have been changed by the small amount of knowledge they've taken in than to be a room full of Bible scholars who are a bunch of jerks who don't do anything about the needs in the world around them. That would be a church that would be wise, not a church that's foolish. So I would say that anything you learn that you don't do anything about is totally useless. So that is to say, when you learn something, recognize that at that moment you've been given more responsibility to turn that into foolishness or into wisdom. And I would suggest, like Solomon said, that wisdom is better than foolishness, just like light is better than dark. So it comes down to this big question that we're going to be talking about for 6 weeks. And if you're in small groups, you're going to be talking about it twice a week for 6 weeks. If you're in a small group and you lead a youth small group, then you get to talk about it 3 times. And if you're ever like, you know what, I just want to keep on hearing it, then yeah, you can check it out on Right Now Media as well, as long as you have an account. So the question is, what is the wise thing to do? And maybe some of you have already guessed that and filled it in on the blank, because there's kind of a hint coming up down there. I'm the type of person, I see blanks in the bulletin, and I'm like, as quickly as I can, I'm putting guesses in there. And then that way when like Doug gets there, I'm like, or yeah, I nailed it, That's when you hear me say amen from the crowd. I'm like, amen, I got that. Andy Stanley, he says that this question goes beyond just what's right and what's wrong, what's moral, what's biblical, what's unbiblical. What's wise has to include that. It has to be biblical, it has to be moral, it has to be right. But there's a whole nother layer to that. It's one thing to just have this black and white understanding of what's true, but there's a whole nother layer to say, what is the wise thing to do? What is the wise thing to act upon? How do I take what I know and act wisely? So he breaks this down into 3 different questions, and we're going to be using this throughout the next 6 weeks. So the first one is, in light of my past experience, what is the wise thing to do? I'm going to guess that everyone in this room is currently alive and has lived for some period of time. That's like my hypothesis and guess. And so if there's anybody that's not in the category, you can come talk to me afterwards, which you actually can't. Okay, and so anyways, I'm guessing that you've lived for some period of time, and in that period of time, you have experienced some things, whether they're good or bad, whether what you've done or other people have done have brought good things and brought benefit to your life, or whether it's brought hurt and destruction or regret or anything like that. So your past, so the first part of that is, in light of my past experiences, what I've learned, what I've seen, what I know from the past, what is the wise thing to do? So I'm going to be giving you some examples of how I'm not wise in life, because I feel more comfortable doing that than just, it was way easier to find examples of how I don't practice wisdom, I guess, when I was sitting down. So I don't know, maybe that's a bad thing. But so anyways, here's how it goes. And maybe some of you can relate to this. I hope so. I hope I'm not the only one, I'm not alone in this boat. So whenever I make a pizza pop, which, man, I love pizza pops, what I do is I put it in the microwave like everyone else does, and then I cook it. And then right when it's done, I take it out, and I know my past experiences, what do? I bite right into it, because I want that pizza pop right now. And then I do that thing that we all do, mouth open, we're gasping, that thing where it's like my mouth is burning, and so then we're like, instead of spitting it out, we're like, if I keep doing this and just chew and then swallow, and then my esophagus, or I don't know if is whatever that tube is called that your food goes down, yeah. And so that, it goes down there, and then that's on fire, and I'm like, give me the fire extinguisher. But then what happens? 15 seconds later, once I can breathe again, I'm like, I pick it up, and I start blowing on that open part of the pizza pop as though that's going to do anything, that's really going to change the temperature. I bite again, and so hours later, my mouth is peeling, and so if you don't do that, maybe I'm crazy, but I know from all the times I've eaten pizza pops, I know that I need to get someone else to make my pizza pops and then hide them for 10 minutes, but I don't. In light of my past experiences, I know what the wise thing to do is, and I don't. In light of my current circumstances, what is the wise thing to do? That's the second part of this question. And your current circumstances actually bring a lot of definition to what is wise. And hear me out, because I'm not talking about moral relativism or relative truth. I believe in objective truth. I believe that truth is absolute. But I think that within that context, your current circumstances, where you find yourself in life, really defines a lot about what the wise thing to do is. And you might say, well, there are a lot of, for example, before you were married, having a whole bunch of sex was really unwise. Now that you're married, wise decision. Do it. That's great. In my opinion, that's good for you. Okay. Guys, that 3 a.m. McDonald's run years ago, that probably wasn't wise. The next day you'd maybe pay for it, you didn't get enough sleep, you're not feeling that good. But now that your wife's pregnant, that 3 a.m. McDonald's run for her, that might be the thing that saves you the next day, And so it definitely changes based on what your current circumstances are. Maybe you've recently gone through a breakup or had some other kind of relational change. Because of the people around you and what they're going through, because of what you're going through, maybe your financial situation has changed, whatever it is, maybe where you live. Because of your current circumstances, what the wise thing to do might actually change over time. It's not always that black and white. The truth is, but how we apply that properly to our lives can change based on where we're at. And the third part is, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? It is so sad to think about how often people in our world throw away their future hopes and dreams for things right now that are so temporary and momentary and fleeting. We so often throw that away. This happens big time in the area of finances. How often do we just pour out money on things we don't need just so that down the road, when we face something that we really want or need or that would be really beneficial in our lives. I just would love this for my kids, or I'd love to be able to contribute to my kids' education, or I'd love to go on that missions trip, or I'd love to be able to give to this need. But we're met with an inability to do that because we didn't ask ourselves, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? I am a firm believer that one day God will bring an experience, an opportunity right in front of you and say, this is an awesome thing that you could be a part of, an awesome thing that you could do. And so often, we are totally paralyzed in taking him up on that opportunity because of decisions we've made in the past. A lot of the times financial, but a lot of times other things as well. Don't throw away your future hopes and dreams for those. You should have future hopes and dreams based on your relationship with God and where you're going in regards to that. I think that one day we'll be face to face with God and we'll say, God, I wanted to do this, but I couldn't. And he'll say, you could have. I just needed you to be more responsible with what I gave you. Maybe it's in the area of relationships or sexually. Maybe where you're at, maybe where you want to be one day, the marriage, the relationship you want to have, the decisions you're making right now, as fun as they might be, might just be screwing up your future hopes and dreams. I don't know what it is, but we trade in big hopes and big dreams for such small, inconsequential things in the present. And it's really too bad to see. So the question is pretty simple. What is the wise thing to do? In light of my past experience, in light of my current circumstances, in light of my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? And Andy Stanley and us, we're giving you homework for the next 3 weeks. I talk about him like we're friends, like he doesn't even know I exist, but we're giving you homework for the next 3 weeks. And the homework is simply ask it. So we're not even saying you need to change anything right now. You can continue to, for the next 3 weeks, just be foolish and make all the terrible decisions you would normally make anyways, but just ask the question when you're making those decisions, when you're making any decision, big or small, what is the wise thing for me to do in light of my past experience, current circumstances, and future hopes and dreams? What is the wise thing to do? And as you ask it, one thing you'll realize is that you and all of us often do not even have our own best interests in mind. We don't like hearing from other people because we're like, they don't get it. But I think so often we don't get it. We don't even get ourselves because we make so many decisions that show that we don't even care about ourselves as much as we should. We don't even have our own best interests in mind. Ask this question in community with your small group, with your spouse, with your family, people that you know and trust. Ask this question personally and as a family. What is the wise thing to do? I think this plays out in a lot of big ways and also small ways. I'll give you 2 last quick examples from my life, and then we'll get out of here. Earlier this year, during ball hockey season, I was at a friend's house before one of our ball hockey games. We ate supper, and then they brought out dessert. It was ice cream cake, right? And so, I know I shouldn't, but I did, because it's ice cream cake. And so I take a piece of ice cream cake and I eat it. And later on, I'm out on the rink and I'm just like, I literally want to die right now. I just can't. And so I remember sitting down on the bench, and this actually was kind of a really kind of intensely spiritual moment for me, because I remember talking to the guy beside me. I'm like, man, this is brutal. I'm tasting it every step I take out there. And so I remember saying, that's it. If next time we have a game, if someone offers me ice cream cake before the game, I was about to say there's no way, but then I realized, I had this moment of realization about myself. I was like, if someone offers me ice cream cake before a game in a few weeks, I'm probably going to take it. I was just like, wow, that's crazy. Why would I know how bad this is. Why would I do that? A more serious example, I remember there was this time, I was in grade 12, and I came out of a pretty rocky past, so trying to figure out how to follow Jesus was a bit of an expedition for me. And I remember I was at youth group one night on a Friday night, and my friend said, hey, my brother's having a party afterwards. He said we could come. Do you want to come over to our house for this party? And at that moment, I should have stopped and said, in light of my past experiences, in light of my current circumstances and my future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? And said, no. But I didn't. So I went to this party, and I remember we were there, and it's kind of that thing, when you kind of want to do something you shouldn't do, and so you kind of ask your friend, and you're on a diet, you're like, hey, you want to eat the cake? Are you going to eat cake? And they're like, I don't know, are you? And you don't want to be the first one to say yeah, but you both want to say yeah. So I remember my friend was like, hey, are you thinking about drinking at all tonight? And I'm just like, I don't know, are you? And we did that thing, and he's like, well, maybe I'll just have one. I was like, yeah, just one. And again, if I would have stopped, in light of my past experiences, my current circumstances, and my future hopes and dreams, what was the wise thing to do? The next day is easy to look back and say, man, I don't have my best interests in mind. I made choices that hurt myself and hurt others. that definitely did not invest into my future hopes and dreams or the future hopes and dreams of other people. There's a big difference between stopping and asking this question and addressing that area of your life and not doing that. And that big difference is the difference between wisdom and foolishness. And like I said, for the next few weeks, just ask the question. In a few weeks, we're going to start getting in your grill a little bit more and in our own grills and saying, now we actually got to start changing some things. But in the meantime, just start asking it and learn some things about yourself as you see how you make decisions in light of asking yourself this question. So as you go out this week, in light of my past experience, current circumstance, future hopes and dreams, what is the wise thing to do? Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this morning. Thank you that you give us wisdom, and that even though we so often choose foolishness, you still love us, and you still care about us, and you still welcome us back into your arms. You're an amazing God. I pray that over the next 6 weeks in our small groups on Sunday mornings, we would learn and gain so much wisdom about you and who you are, God. I am so thankful for the ways that you're working in this church and the ways that we're continuing to grow and know you better, God. Thank you for all that you do. We love you so much. Amen. Thanks so much, guys. Have an awesome week.